I gave my father my left kidney to save his life. The recovery took 10 agonizing weeks, leaving me with a 6-inch scar that still bled through my bandages. Yet at our family Thanksgiving dinner, my mother stood up, tapped her crystal champagne glass, and looked right past me. She raised her drink to my sister and proudly announced to a room of 20 relatives that my sister was the hero who saved my father's life by raising $250,000 online. As the room erupted in applause for a lie, I braced my hands on the table to stand up and scream the truth. But my frail father grabbed my wrist. His eyes were wide with terror. Under the table, he slid a crumpled napkin into my palm. The hastily scribbled words changed my life forever. It read, "I got a report from the IRS. She kept all the money. Stay quiet. Your mother has me locked down." My name is Lauren. I am 33 years old, and I work as a healthcare data analyst in Chicago. I am about to tell you how I dismantled my toxic family from the inside out, using nothing but their own greed and my hospital records. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the invisible child who finally fought back. Growing up in a wealthy suburb of Chicago meant keeping up appearances was the only religion my family practiced. My mother, Patricia, cared only about status country club memberships and projecting the image of absolute perfection. My younger sister, Brittany, was her ultimate masterpiece. Brittany was 30 years old, a social media lifestyle influencer who knew exactly how to play the victim and manipulate every situation to her advantage. I was the opposite. I was independent, analytical, and completely immune to my mother's demands for superficial perfection. Because I refused to play their game, I was treated like an outsider in my own home. The only person I truly cared about was my father, Richard. He was a good man, but deeply passive, constantly bowing to my mother's controlling nature just to keep the peace. When my father went into renal failure earlier this year, the entire family panicked. His kidneys were shutting down and the transplant waiting list was years long. Without hesitation, I got tested. I was a perfect match. I did not do it for praise or for my mother's approval. I did it because I loved my dad. The surgery was brutal. They removed my left kidney, leaving me with a deep, jagged incision across my lower abdomen. The recovery was supposed to be supported by family, but my mother told me she simply could not spare the time to help me at my apartment because she was too busy managing my father's post-operative care. For 10 weeks, I suffered alone. I struggled to stand up, to cook for myself, to manage my pain. I wore a tight surgical binder every single day, just to keep my core supported. Meanwhile, my sister Brittany took to the internet. She launched a massive fundraising campaign recording tearful videos about our father's failing health and begging her followers to help cover the astronomical medical bills. The campaign went viral. She raised exactly $250,000. But here's the detail that made my blood boil. My premium corporate health insurance covered every single cent of the transplant. My father did not owe the hospital a dime. I knew this because I was the donor, and I processed healthcare data for a living. I assumed Brittany was raising the money to help cover his long-term at-home care or expensive anti-rejection medications. I had no idea how dark the truth actually was. That brings us to Thanksgiving. It was my first time back at the family mansion since the surgery. I sat at the long dining table surrounded by 20 aunts, uncles, and cousins. I was in intense physical discomfort. The surgical binder was digging into my fresh scar, and I could feel a slight dampness where the incision was still weeping blood. I shifted in my seat, wincing just as my mother stood up at the head of the table. She tapped her silver fork against her champagne glass. The lively chatter in the room instantly died down. She looked radiant in her expensive designer dress, projecting the image of a resilient matriarch. "I want to take a moment to reflect on everything we have to be thankful for this year," my mother said, her voice dripping with artificial emotion. "As you all know, Richard nearly left us. It was the most terrifying period of our lives, but we were saved. We were saved by the tireless, selfless dedication of my beautiful daughter." She extended her glass toward Brittany. Brittany sat there wearing a brand new designer outfit, holding hands with her husband Jamal. Jamal is a 32-year-old African-American city councilman who recently launched a high-profile re-election campaign. He smiled proudly at his wife, completely unaware that the woman he married was a fraud. To Brittany, my mother continued loudly, "You stayed up night after night organizing that fundraiser. You carried the emotional weight of this entire family on your shoulders. Because of your brilliant campaign, you raised $250,000 and paid off the medical debt that would have bankrupted us. You saved your father's life. We owe you everything." The dining room erupted into applause. My aunts and uncles murmured words of praise. Everyone raised their glasses to Brittany. Not a single person looked at me. Not one relative acknowledged the woman sitting right there wearing a medical corset who had actually been cut open on an operating table. Brittany smiled humbly, playing the perfect martyr, soaking up the validation she had stolen directly from my bleeding body. A hot, suffocating rage rose in my chest. My vision tunneled. The sheer audacity of my mother to erase my physical sacrifice just to elevate her golden child was sickening. I placed both hands flat on the edge of the mahogany table, gritting my teeth against the searing pain in my abdomen. I was going to stand up. I was going to rip my shirt open, show them the bloody bandages, and scream the truth until the crystal glasses shattered. But before I could lock my knees and rise, a trembling hand clamped down hard on my wrist. It was my father. He was sitting to my left, looking shockingly frail in a loose gray sweater. I looked over at him, ready to pull my arm away, but the expression on his face stopped me cold. He was not looking at me with his usual passive submission. His eyes were wide with sheer terror. He glanced frantically toward my mother, who was still smiling at the far end of the table, and then he looked back at me. Under the cover of the heavy linen tablecloth, his trembling fingers slid a crumpled paper napkin into the palm of my hand. He squeezed my fingers closed over it, his grip desperate and urgent. Then he quickly pulled his hand away and picked up his water glass, pretending to take a sip. I slowly lowered my hands to my lap. My heart was hammering against my ribs, echoing in my ears over the sound of my relatives cheering for my sister. I carefully unfolded the stiff paper napkin under the table, keeping my eyes fixed straight ahead. I looked down at the hasty, jagged handwriting. The ink was slightly smudged, written by a man who was clearly shaking. The message contained only 4 short sentences, but they were enough to make the air leave my lungs completely. It read, "I got a report from the IRS. She kept all the money. Stay quiet. Your mother has me locked down." I stared at those words until they blurred. She kept all the money. $250,000. My mother and sister had not just stolen my sacrifice to boost their egos. They had committed massive, systematic fraud. And judging by the fear in my father's eyes and the words locked down, they were holding him captive to get away with it. I looked up from the napkin and stared directly at my mother, who was now hugging Brittany. I did not stand up. I did not scream. I just smiled. Let them have their applause. They had no idea that they had just handed a healthcare data analyst the exact thread needed to unravel their entire lives. The clinking of silverware and boisterous laughter resumed in the dining room as the dessert plates were cleared. I carefully slipped the crumpled napkin into the pocket of my slacks. Every movement sent a sharp flare of heat through my abdominal wall, but I forced myself to walk upright. I waited until my mother excused herself to fetch the coffee service before following her through the swinging double doors into the massive gourmet kitchen. The heavy wooden doors swung shut behind me, cutting off the noise of the party. Patricia stood by the marble island arranging silver spoons on a silver tray. She did not even look up when I walked in. "Are you quite finished trying to draw attention to yourself, Lauren?" she asked, her tone sharp and clipped. "Your posture at the table was atrocious. You looked like you were going to be sick right on the centerpiece." I stepped closer to the island, ignoring the throbbing pain under my surgical binder. I pulled the crumpled napkin from my pocket and smoothed it flat on the pristine marble countertop, right next to her silver tray. "What is this?" I asked, keeping my voice dangerously low. Patricia finally paused. She glanced down at the napkin. Her perfectly manicured fingers hesitated for only a fraction of a second before she casually resumed arranging the spoons. Her face remained a mask of flawless indifference. "It looks like trash," she replied smoothly. "Which is exactly where it belongs." Dad says you have him locked down, I pressed, leaning forward. He says Brittany kept the $250,000. The IRS sent a report. You committed fraud, Mom. My insurance covered every penny of that transplant. I know because I am the one who gave him the kidney, and I know how the billing works. Patricia set down the last spoon. She slowly turned to face me. There was no panic in her eyes. There was no guilt. There was only pure, unadulterated contempt. You listen to me, you jealous, unstable spinster, she hissed, stepping into my personal space. Her voice was a venomous whisper designed to stay within the walls of the kitchen. You have spent your entire life trying to ruin your sister's spotlight. You are 33 years old, living alone in a sterile apartment, staring at spreadsheets all day. You have no husband. You have no children. You have absolutely nothing to be proud of except this one desperate act of martyrdom. My breath caught in my throat. The sheer cruelty of her words felt like a physical blow, but I refused to break eye contact. You think handing over an organ entitles you to run this family? She continued, her eyes flashing with malice. You think it makes you special. It does not. Brittany is the heart of this family. She sacrificed her time, her image, and her emotional well-being to organize that campaign. Do you have any idea how exhausting it is to manage public relations during a medical crisis? That money was compensation for her trauma. It is securing her future. Compensation. I repeated, feeling a sickening wave of realization. You let her steal $250,000 from strangers who thought they were saving a dying man. You are holding Dad hostage in his own home to keep him quiet. Your father is a sick, confused old man who does not understand complex finances, she snapped. He is receiving the best care money can buy. My care. If you breathe a word of your little conspiracy theories to anyone, I will have you committed. You already have a history of needing therapy, Lauren. Who do you think the police will believe? The respected matriarch and her prominent influencer daughter, or the bitter, lonely woman who clearly suffered a mental break after a major surgery? She reached out and snatched the napkin from the counter. She tore it into tiny pieces and dropped them into the stainless steel trash can. You are going to walk back out there, she commanded, pointing a long acrylic nail at my chest. You are going to smile. You are going to congratulate your sister. And then, you are going to go back to your miserable little life and stay out of ours. I stood frozen. The physical pain in my stomach was nothing compared to the chilling realization of exactly who my mother was. She was not just a narcissist. She was a calculated criminal, willing to destroy her own husband and daughter to protect her golden child. Before I could formulate a response, the kitchen doors swung open. Hey, Patricia, do you need any help with the coffee? The heavy tension in the room instantly evaporated. Jamal walked in wearing a sharply tailored navy suit. At 32, he possessed a natural charisma that made him incredibly successful in local politics. As a city councilman running for a highly contested re-election, he carried himself with an effortless, commanding warmth. He was a genuinely good man, a stark contrast to the viper pit he had married into. Patricia immediately transformed. Her face softened into a bright, welcoming smile. Oh, Jamal, sweetheart, no, I have it completely under control. Lauren and I were just having a quiet moment catching up. Jamal smiled warmly and walked over to us. He placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, careful not to jostle me. Lauren, I am so glad I caught you alone for a second, he said. His deep voice was filled with absolute sincerity. I really wanted to thank you. I stared at him, trying to process the whiplash of the shifting atmosphere. Thank me for what? For being such an incredible rock for Brittany, he said, looking at me with nothing but admiration. I know the surgery was hard on you, but Brittany has been an absolute wreck these past few months. Organizing that GoFundMe, dealing with the hospital billing department, negotiating with the collection agencies. It completely drained her. She was up until 3 in the morning crying over those hospital invoices. I felt the floor drop out from under me. I looked at Jamal, recognizing the absolute truth in his eyes. He believed every single word he was saying. When we finally hit that fundraising goal and paid off the hospital last week, the relief on her face was indescribable. He continued, shaking his head in awe of his wife. I am just so incredibly proud of her. but I know she could not have held it together without your sacrifice. Giving Richard your kidney gave Brittany the time she needed to save him financially. You are a hero, Lauren. I glanced past Jamal. Patricia was watching me like a hawk, her eyes daring me to speak. In that fraction of a second, the entire puzzle snapped together in my analytical mind. Jamal was clean. He was a rising political star, an African-American man who had built his career on a platform of transparency and community trust. Brittany had not just lied to the internet and to our father, she had lied to her own husband. She had manufactured a fake crisis, fabricated fake hospital invoices, and convinced the man she slept next to that she was a savior. Jamal thought the $250,000 went directly to the hospital. He had absolutely no idea the money was sitting in his wife's bank account. The sheer scale of the deception was breathtaking. If Jamal knew the truth, it would destroy his marriage. If the public found out, it would destroy his political career. Brittany had tied an anchor of federal fraud around her innocent husband's neck. I looked back at Jamal, forcing my facial muscles to relax. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat and gave him a soft, convincing smile. You are welcome, Jamal, I said, my voice steady and clear. Brittany certainly did put on an unforgettable performance. I am just glad I could be here to see exactly how it all turned out. Jamal beamed, giving my shoulder one last appreciative squeeze before grabbing a tray of coffee mugs to help Patricia. As he turned his back, I met my mother's gaze one final time. I did not glare. I did not threaten her. I simply gave her a cold, calculating nod. She thought she had backed me into a corner by threatening me with my father and my mental health. She was wrong. She had just handed me the weapon I needed to burn her world to the ground. I pushed through the heavy wooden doors of the kitchen and stepped back into the warmly lit hallway. The transition from the sterile kitchen to the festive dining area felt like crossing between two different realities. My heart hammered against my ribs, and the adrenaline flooding my system was beginning to wear off, leaving behind a sharp, throbbing pain in my abdomen. I pressed my hand against my surgical binder, taking shallow breaths. I needed to leave. I needed to get out of this house before my physical strength completely gave out. I made my way toward the front foyer to retrieve my coat. The sounds of my relatives laughing and clinking glasses echoed from the main living room. They were completely oblivious to the rot underneath the expensive hardwood floors they stood on. As I reached the hall closet, a hand shot out from the shadows of the adjacent powder room. Long fingers with perfectly manicured acrylic nails dug viciously into my bruised bicep. I gasped, pulling back, but the grip only tightened. Brittany yanked me into the dim alcove out of sight from the main gathering areas. The sweet, humble influencer persona she had worn all evening was completely gone. Her face was contorted into a mask of pure malice. Stripped of the ring light halo and the camera filters, my sister looked exactly like what she was, a predator. You think you are so smart, Lauren, she hissed, shoving me slightly against the flocked wallpaper. Any sudden movement sent fire radiating through my incision, but I refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing me wince. I saw you looking at Dad, she continued, her voice a jagged whisper. I saw him slip you that napkin. Do not play dumb with me. You always think you are the smartest person in the room just because you stare at computer screens all day. I kept my expression completely blank. I am smart enough to know you are committing federal fraud, Brittany, I replied, keeping my voice steady. You stole $250,000 from people who thought they were saving a dying man. You lied to your followers, you lied to our family, you even lied to Jamal. Brittany let out a short, harsh laugh. She leaned in close, her expensive perfume making my stomach turn. Jamal is an idealist, she spat. He needs money to win this election, and I am making sure he gets it. I am securing my future. Dad was going to die anyway before you decided to play the martyr. You think anyone is going to care about your little crusade? They will care when the IRS audits you, I countered. They will care when Jamal finds out his campaign is funded by medical fraud. Brittany stepped even closer, pinning me with a look of absolute sociopathic calm. Listen to me very carefully, you pathetic loser, she whispered. Mom holds Dad's medical power of attorney. She controls every single aspect of his post-operative care. Right now, he is recovering in a luxury private suite with round-the-clock nursing staff. If you breathe one single word of this to Jamal, the police, or anyone else, Mom will pull the plug on his care plan tomorrow morning. My blood ran cold. The threat hung in the air, heavy and absolute. She will sign the discharge papers and transfer him to the most underfunded, rotting state-run nursing facility we can find. Brittany continued, a cruel smile stretching across her face. You know exactly the kind of places I am talking about. The ones that smell like bleach and neglect. He will be sitting in a soiled bed in a shared room with no private nurses and no specialized transplant care. His body will reject the kidney. He will die, Lauren, and it will be entirely your fault because you could not keep your mouth shut. I stared at her, feeling a terrifying wave of helplessness wash over me. She was not bluffing. Patricia had the legal authority to do exactly what Brittany was threatening. My father was a hostage in his own failing body. If I went to the police right now, Patricia would execute the transfer before the investigation even began. The stress and lack of proper care would kill him within weeks. You do not have the guts to challenge us, Brittany sneered, stepping back and smoothing the fabric of her designer dress. You have always been weak. You let Mom walk all over you, and now you will let me do it too. Because if you do not, Dad pays the price. Now grab your cheap coat and get the hell out of my house. She turned on her heel and walked back toward the dining room, seamlessly slipping her vibrant influencer smile back onto her face as she rejoined the party. I stood in the alcove trembling. The physical agony radiating from my surgical wound was blinding, but the emotional shock was worse. I was trapped. They had cornered me, using the one person I loved as a human shield. I grabbed my wool coat from the closet, moving mechanically. I did not say goodbye to anyone. I walked out the heavy front door and stepped into the freezing Chicago night. The icy wind hit my face, serving as a harsh reminder of reality. I slowly made my way down the long paved driveway toward my modest sedan. Every step required monumental effort. By the time I reached my car, I was gasping for air, tears of pain and frustration stinging my eyes. I climbed into the driver's seat and locked the doors. The silence of the car was deafening. I leaned my head against the steering wheel, closing my eyes. I pictured my father, frail and terrified, sliding that napkin into my hand. He had risked everything to warn me. He was relying on me. Brittany and Patricia thought my silence was guaranteed. They thought because I was quiet, I was defeated. They thought their threats had paralyzed me. But they had made one catastrophic miscalculation. They forgot what I do for a living. I am a healthcare data analyst. I spend my days navigating the most complex, secure digital infrastructures in the world. I track billing codes, trace medical supply chains, and audit insurance claims. I know exactly how hospitals process payments. I know how to follow digital footprints through the labyrinth of corporate healthcare networks. I know how to find the money. My mother and sister were playing a game of social manipulation and emotional blackmail. But fraud leaves a paper trail. Every forged invoice, every wire transfer, every cent that moved from that GoFundMe account into Brittany's pockets existed as a line of data. And data never lies. I opened my eyes, staring out through the frost-covered windshield. The tears had stopped. The panic was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. I was not going to scream. I was not going to argue with them. I was going to tear their entire lives apart, line by line, spreadsheet by spreadsheet. I would build a case so bulletproof, so undeniably solid, that no amount of gaslighting or victim playing could save them. I would secure my father's safety first, and then I would drop the hammer. I started the engine, the heater roaring to life. They wanted to use my kidney to fund their luxury lifestyle. They were about to learn that taking a piece of me came with a lethal price. I shifted the car into drive and pulled away from the mansion, ready to go to war. I pulled away from the mansion, fully ready to go to war. The long drive back to my downtown Chicago apartment was a blur of neon streetlights and freezing rain. The moment I locked my heavy deadbolt behind me, the adrenaline finally crashed. My knees buckled, and I collapsed against the solid wooden door, gasping as a fresh wave of fire tore through my abdomen. The tight surgical binder felt suffocating, soaked with cold sweat, and a faint trace of fresh blood. I squeezed my eyes shut, riding out the wave of physical agony. I forced myself to stand. There was no time for weakness. I limped down the narrow hallway into my home office, a cramped space dominated by a massive L-shaped desk and 3 high-resolution monitors. This was my sanctuary. This was where I held all the power. I lowered myself into my ergonomic chair, gritting my teeth against the sharp pull of my healing core muscles. I booted up my encrypted workstation. The low hum of the processor filled the quiet room. I brewed a strong pot of black coffee and set the steaming mug beside my keyboard. As a living organ donor, my medical file was intrinsically, legally, and permanently linked to my father's recipient file. The hospital protocol mandated absolute transparency for transplant pairs, ensuring both parties understood the comprehensive financial and medical scopes of the highly invasive procedure. Patricia and Brittany clearly did not understand how interconnected the digital healthcare landscape truly was. They operated on outdated assumptions. They assumed they could gatekeep the physical paperwork, intercept the mailed envelopes, and keep me completely in the dark. They were absolute fools. I logged into the Central Hospital patient portal using my secure 2-factor authentication. The sterile blue and white interface loaded instantly on my center monitor. I quickly navigated past my surgical recovery notes and blood work results. I clicked directly into the joint financial ledger. The portal system prompted a strict secondary security check. I typed in my credentials without a second of hesitation. The screen populated with rows upon rows of billing codes, insurance adjustments, and provider fees. To a normal person looking at the screen, it would look like a meaningless, intimidating wall of numbers and obscure medical jargon. To me, it was a perfectly illuminated roadmap. I ran a complex data extraction script, filtering the thousands of line items from the day of our initial pre-op screenings all the way down to my father's current luxury recovery suite charges. I cross-referenced the billing codes with the explanation of benefits from my corporate health insurance. I work for one of the largest healthcare data firms in the entire country. Our employee insurance policy is Platinum Tier, specifically designed to cover catastrophic events and major transplant surgeries at 100% to actively encourage living donors. I watched the green progress bar on my screen race toward completion. The final spreadsheet generated, laying out the aggregate costs in bold black text. Gross hospital charges totaled just over $300,000. My eyes tracked across the screen to the column labeled Insurance Payout. The number matched exactly. I scrolled down to the final column, the Patient Responsibility. The amount my father supposedly owed out of pocket for the entire ordeal. The number was 0. Absolutely 0. My insurance had covered every single cent. The elite surgeon fees the operating room cost the anesthesiologist, the expensive anti-rejection medications, and even the private post-operative recovery suite. It was all fully paid. The GoFundMe campaign was built on a complete and total fabrication. There was no crippling medical debt threatening to destroy the family. There was no threat of bankruptcy looming over my parents' heads. The entire narrative of a family drowning in hospital bills was a calculated, highly lucrative scam. My hands hovered over the mechanical keyboard. I pulled up a secondary browser window and navigated directly to the GoFundMe page Brittany had created. The campaign banner featured a heartbreaking photo of my father in a hospital bed, a photo clearly taken before his surgery when he looked his absolute worst. The progress bar proudly displayed $250,000 raised from thousands of sympathetic donors. I scrolled through the campaign updates. Brittany had posted tearful videos and impassioned pleas for urgent financial help. But what I was looking for was buried in an update posted 3 weeks ago. She had uploaded a scanned document to prove to her trusting followers that the funds were desperately needed. It was an invoice purportedly from the hospital billing department showing a massive outstanding balance of $245,000. I downloaded the image file and pulled it into my forensic analysis software. I split my monitors, placing the official hospital ledger on the left and Brittany's uploaded invoice on the right. The discrepancies were glaringly obvious to a trained eye. The font kerning on the hospital logo was slightly off-center. The billing codes listed did not match the National Correct Coding Initiative standards. They had used standard emergency room codes instead of the highly specific transplant modifiers. But the most damning piece of evidence was at the very bottom of the fraudulent document. It was a digital signature acknowledging the receipt of the massive debt. It belonged to Patricia. I zoomed in on the signature block. The metadata embedded deep within the uploaded PDF file told a story of premeditated criminal fraud. The document had not been generated by the sophisticated hospital billing software. The metadata clearly showed it was created using a basic consumer-grade PDF editor on a personal computer. I cross-referenced the embedded IP address. It traced back directly to the IP address of my parents' home network. Patricia had not just allowed Brittany to run a deceptive fundraising campaign, she had actively manufactured fraudulent legal documents to legitimize the entire operation. She had forged hospital invoices to extract money from thousands of well-meaning strangers. The audacity was staggering. They had weaponized my father's severe illness and my brutal physical sacrifice to execute a massive wire fraud scheme. I leaned back in my chair, the blue light of the monitors casting long shadows across my home office. The pain in my abdomen pulsed, but the fierce surge of adrenaline pushed it completely to the background. I had them. The evidence was irrefutable. I began capturing screen recordings, downloading the raw data files, and compiling the digital footprints into an encrypted offshore server. I made triple backups of the insurance payouts, the $0 patient responsibility ledger, and the metadata proving Patricia forged the documents. If Patricia wanted to play games with my father's life using fraudulent documents, I would use the cold, hard truth to dismantle her reality. I reached for my coffee mug, my mind already racing to the next logical step. Finding out the truth about the hospital bills was only the beginning. Now I needed to follow the money and see exactly where that $250,000 had actually gone. I set down my empty coffee mug and cracked my knuckles. The hospital portal was closed and securely backed up to my offline server. Now it was time to follow the money. GoFundMe campaigns leave a highly visible digital trail if you know exactly where to look and how to exploit the data. Brittany was arrogant and sloppy. She had linked the fundraiser directly to her public social media profiles, making the initial digital footprint incredibly easy to isolate. I opened a secure terminal on my left monitor and ran a reverse lookup on the routing numbers associated with the massive campaign withdrawals. I expected to see the funds routed directly into my sister's personal checking account. I assumed she would simply transfer the money and start swiping her debit card at luxury boutiques. But as the financial data populated my screen, I realized Patricia had clearly instructed her to be more cautious. The funds did not drop into a standard personal account because a sudden influx of $250,000 would immediately trigger automated tax flags and banking alerts. Instead, the $250,000 was wired in 3 massive tranches to a corporate business account. I pinged the Illinois Secretary of State Public Business database using a proxy server to mask my location. I typed in the routing destination and waited for the query to return a match. The results flashed on my screen, and the name of the corporate entity made my stomach churn with absolute disgust. The money had landed in a limited liability company registered just 4 months ago, perfectly coinciding with my father's kidney failure diagnosis. The name on the digital registry was the Hope Foundation, LLC. They had actually named their fraudulent shell company the Hope Foundation. The sheer audacity was nauseating. I pulled the registration documents to view the corporate officers. The registered agent and primary owner was Brittany. The secondary authorized signatory was Patricia. They had set up a classic shell company designed specifically to funnel charity money and mask their personal spending. It was a sophisticated money laundering operation executed by a superficial influencer and a status-obsessed suburban housewife. I needed to see exactly how they were spending the stolen funds. I managed to bypass the primary banking firewall using a known back-end vulnerability that I frequently encountered during my routine hospital audits. Within minutes, I gained read-only access to the Hope Foundation financial ledger. I downloaded the transaction history and imported it into my data analysis software. I watched the stolen money bleed out line by line. The vanity purchases were glaringly obvious. There was a $30,000 outgoing wire labeled as a down payment to a luxury car dealership, matching the exact price of the brand new Tesla Brittany was currently driving. There were multiple transactions totaling $10,000 sent to high-end designer boutiques in downtown Chicago, confirming the source of the extravagant gown she wore to Thanksgiving dinner. There were expensive restaurant charges, spa visits, and five-star hotel bookings. But those self-indulgent expenses barely scratched the surface. They did not account for the bulk of the missing funds. I ran a sorting algorithm, organizing the spreadsheet by transaction amount from highest to lowest. The screen refreshed, and my eyes locked onto a single massive outgoing wire transfer executed just 2 weeks ago. The amount was exactly $150,000. It was a staggering sum of money to move in a single digital transaction. I looked at the receiving institution. It was not a car dealership or a luxury real estate agency. It was sent to a specialized financial institution that exclusively managed political campaign funds and electoral war chests. My heart rate spiked as a terrifying realization began to form in my mind. I quickly traced the destination routing number to find the exact beneficiary of the massive transfer. The receiving account belonged to a registered political action committee. I leaned close to my monitor, reading the registered name of the political action committee aloud to the empty room. Citizens for Jamal. I sat back in my ergonomic chair, completely stunned by the sheer magnitude of their reckless stupidity. Jamal was a fiercely honest man, running for a highly contested city council seat on a strict platform of transparency and community trust. I knew without a shadow of a doubt that he had absolutely no idea where this massive influx of campaign cash had actually come from. Brittany must have lied directly to his face. She likely told him she had secured a wealthy private donor or funneled her lucrative social media influencer sponsorships directly into his political war chest. She smiled in his face, kissed him goodnight, and turned the man she supposedly loved into an unwitting accomplice to a catastrophic federal crime. The puzzle was completely solved. Patricia and Brittany did not just steal money to buy nice things. They stole money to buy political power. They wanted Jamal to win the election so Patricia could parade around the country club as the mother-in-law of a powerful Chicago politician, and Brittany could play the role of the glamorous, influential political wife. They used my kidney and my father's illness to fund their ultimate social climbing fantasy. My hands actually shook as I highlighted the $150,000 transaction and locked it into my encrypted evidence folder. This was no longer just a bitter family dispute over a stolen GoFundMe campaign. This was no longer a simple civil matter of forged hospital bills. This was felony wire fraud. This was deliberate money laundering. This was a severe and highly illegal violation of federal campaign finance laws. The Federal Bureau of Investigation does not just slap wrists for moving stolen charity funds into political campaigns. They destroy lives. They seize assets. They hand down lengthy federal prison sentences. Patricia thought she had trapped me by threatening to move my father to a substandard nursing home. She thought she held all the leverage because she controlled his medical power of attorney. But looking at the explosive federal evidence glowing on my monitors, I realized she was completely defenseless. I had the smoking gun that would absolutely obliterate her world. I just needed to secure my father's physical safety first, and then the trap would snap shut forever. I stared at the encrypted folder containing the ruin of my mother and sister. The digital lock clicked shut on the server securing the evidence of their federal crimes. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second, allowing myself a single shaky breath. The pain in my side was a dull roar, a constant reminder of the physical piece of myself they had exploited. I needed to focus on extracting my father. He was the only vulnerable piece left on the board. If I moved against Patricia while he was still under her roof, she would execute her threat and transfer him to a decaying state facility. I began drafting a timeline for a private medical transport, calculating the exact window when my mother usually attended her weekly country club mixer. My fingers flew across the keyboard, mapping out logistics, routing emergency funds to cover the transport, and searching for premium rehabilitation centers operating under strict privacy protocols. I was so deeply absorbed in the extraction strategy that I completely missed the subtle digital tripwire I had crossed. When I accessed the joint medical ledger through the hospital portal, I had used my legal credentials as the living donor. What I failed to consider was the automated notification system built into the hospital's privacy compliance software. As the registered medical power of attorney, Patricia received a highly detailed email alert whenever a secondary party accessed the restricted financial tiers of my father's medical file. I did not know it at that exact moment, but Patricia was sitting in her lavish living room sipping her morning coffee when the hospital alert popped up on her phone. She saw my name. She saw the exact timestamp of my login. She saw the specific financial ledgers I had viewed. A normal person would have panicked. A normal person would have called me begging for forgiveness or demanding to know what I had found. Patricia was not normal. She was a tactical predator. She immediately recognized the existential threat I posed to her carefully curated life. Instead of confronting me directly, she chose a method designed to completely paralyze me. She knew exactly where I worked. She knew how incredibly strict my healthcare data firm was regarding patient privacy and data security. She picked up her phone, masked her caller identification, and dialed the corporate compliance hotline for my employer. Playing the role of a concerned anonymous citizen, she spun a masterful lie. She reported that a senior data analyst named Lauren was illegally utilizing proprietary corporate software to bypass hospital firewalls and unlawfully access the restricted medical records of a high-profile patient. She threw around aggressive keywords like HIPAA violation, data breach, and unauthorized financial surveillance. It was a calculated lethal strike aimed directly at my livelihood. The first sign of trouble arrived just before noon. I was finishing the medical transport booking when my corporate email chimed with a high-priority notification. It was a calendar invite from the Director of Human Resources and the Chief Compliance Officer. The subject line simply read, "Urgent Personnel Review." The meeting was scheduled to begin in exactly 2 minutes. A cold knot formed in my chest. HR never scheduled immediate mandatory meetings unless someone was being terminated. I clicked the Zoom link, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The video connected, revealing the sterile white walls of the corporate human resources office. 2 unsmiling executives stared back at me through the webcam. They did not engage in any pleasantries. The chief compliance officer leaned forward, his face a mask of bureaucratic severity. He informed me that the company had received a highly credible anonymous tip just an hour ago. The tip alleged that I had committed a gross violation of the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. They accused me of utilizing company hardware to illegally access and download the restricted medical and financial files of an external patient without proper medical authorization. I sat frozen in my ergonomic chair. I immediately tried to defend myself. I kept my voice steady, explaining that the patient in question was my own father. I stated clearly that I was his living organ donor and that I possessed full legal authorization to view our joint medical billing ledgers through the standard patient portal. I told them I was simply reviewing my own insurance explanations of benefits. The HR director shook her head, her expression entirely unsympathetic. She stated that while I might have personal portal access, the anonymous tip specifically alleged I used proprietary corporate data scraping tools to bypass standard hospital security measures. Because our firm handled sensitive contracts with that exact hospital network, any allegation of a data breach had to be treated as a catastrophic liability. They could not simply take my word for it. They had to launch a full-scale forensic audit of my workstation, my network traffic, and my recent data queries to ensure the company was not exposed to federal lawsuits. Until that comprehensive investigation was completed, they had no choice but to neutralize the potential threat. The HR director delivered the final blow with chilling efficiency. Effective immediately, I was suspended from my position without pay. I was ordered to cease all work activities and prohibited from contacting any clients or colleagues. Before I could even formulate another sentence to protest the suspension, my work monitor went completely black. The company IT department had executed a remote lockout. My corporate email, my internal messaging channels, and my secure databases were completely wiped from my system. The Zoom call abruptly disconnected, leaving me staring at my dark reflection in the dead monitor. The silence in my apartment was deafening. I sat alone in my home office, the pain in my surgical wound radiating outward, matching the sickening realization of what had just happened. Patricia had not just retaliated. She had surgically dismantled my entire professional life in less than a morning. She had severed my income, destroyed my professional reputation, and tied me up in a potentially devastating federal compliance investigation. She wanted me broke, terrified, and entirely focused on my own survival, so I would not have the strength or the resources to come after her. She had played her hand brilliantly, using the very system I relied on against me. I was now a suspended unpaid analyst facing severe professional ruin. I sat in the dim light of my home office, listening to the silence of my apartment. The sudden violent severing of my digital lifeline left me entirely adrift. My corporate laptop sat useless on the desk, a heavy brick of dead metal and glass. Without my salary, I could not afford the expensive rent on this downtown Chicago apartment for more than a few months. Without my professional reputation, I would never be hired in the healthcare data analytics field again. Patricia knew exactly where to strike to paralyze me completely. She had calculated that an unemployed, disgraced woman facing a federal compliance investigation would possess zero credibility. A sharp, agonizing cramp seized my abdomen, pulling me out of my spiraling thoughts. I gasped, clutching the edge of the heavy desk. The sudden surge of stress had caused my core muscles to contract violently against the fresh kidney extraction site. I looked down at my gray sweatpants. A fresh, dark stain was blooming through the thick fabric of my surgical binder. The incision was weeping blood again. I forced myself out of the ergonomic chair, my legs trembling under my own weight. I hobbled down the narrow hallway to the bathroom, flipping on the harsh overhead vanity lights. The woman staring back at me in the mirror looked like a ghost. My skin was pallid with dark bruised circles dragging down my eyes. I carefully unfastened the Velcro straps of the surgical corset, wincing as the fabric pulled away from the raw skin. The 6-inch jagged red scar stretching across my lower stomach looked inflamed and angry. I grabbed a clean gauze pad and pressed it firmly against the seeping wound, closing my eyes against the intense burning sensation. This was my reward for trying to save my father's life. I was bleeding alone in a silent apartment, suspended from my career and framed as a criminal by the very woman who gave birth to me. Patricia and Brittany had successfully neutralized me. They had cornered me in a space where speaking out would destroy my father and staying quiet would mean accepting my own total destruction. They wanted me to feel small. They wanted me to feel exactly like the helpless, unloved daughter I was growing up. The isolation was absolute. I had no husband to lean on, no siblings who cared, and a father who was currently locked away as a literal hostage in a luxury rehabilitation suite. I sank to the cold tile floor of the bathroom, holding the bloody gauze to my side. The walls of the apartment felt like they were closing in, crushing the remaining breath out of my lungs. For a long, terrifying hour, I let the darkness win. I let the pain and the betrayal wash over me in freezing, suffocating waves. But as the blood slowly clotted beneath the fresh bandages, a different kind of sensation began to take hold. It started as a tiny spark of defiance deep in my chest and rapidly ignited into a blazing, uncontrollable inferno. I was not that helpless little girl anymore. I was a highly trained data analyst who had just secured the digital equivalent of a nuclear bomb. Patricia had severed my corporate network access, but she forgot one crucial detail. My offline server was completely independent of my employer's hardware. I pushed myself off the bathroom floor, ignoring the lingering ache in my side. I walked back into the office and bypassed the dead corporate laptop. I powered on my personal encrypted desktop tower. The screen flared to life, displaying the heavily secured offshore server where I had meticulously stored every single piece of evidence. I did not need my company to destroy Patricia and Brittany. I only needed a printer. I loaded the tray of my high-capacity laser printer with a fresh ream of paper and hit execute. The machine hummed to life, churning out page after page of undeniable truth. I watched the physical manifestation of their federal crimes pile up in the output tray. The $0 hospital ledger proving my insurance covered everything. The forged out-of-pocket medical invoices bearing Patricia's digital signature. The bank routing numbers tracking the stolen $250,000 from GoFundMe straight into the Hope Foundation shell company. The final damning wire transfer of $150,000 funneled directly into Jamal's political action committee. I stacked the papers into neat, pristine piles across the surface of my desk. A normal person would have grabbed these files and driven straight to the nearest police precinct. I wanted to do exactly that. I wanted to watch the authorities kick down the door of that suburban mansion and drag my mother out in handcuffs. But my analytical mind slammed the brakes on my impulsive rage. If I went to the police right now, the bureaucratic machine would move far too slowly. Investigators would need days, perhaps weeks, to verify the financial documents and secure warrants. Patricia would be notified the moment the inquiry began. The very first thing she would do to retaliate would be executing her threat against my father. She held his medical power of attorney. She could legally sign him out of his premium care suite and dump him into a neglectful state-run facility before the police even finished their preliminary interviews. His compromised immune system would never survive the shock. I could not drop the hammer until Richard was completely out of the blast radius. I needed an airtight extraction plan. I needed to physically remove my father from her grasp strip, her of that medical leverage, and secure him in a location she could never access. Only then could I unleash this avalanche of evidence. I grabbed a red marker and began drawing a tactical timeline on my whiteboard. The counterattack had officially begun. I spent the night mapping out extraction logistics on my whiteboard. By sunrise, I had a timeline, but zero sleep. My incision burned, reminding me of the physical toll this war was taking. I brewed coffee and sat heavily on my couch, turning on the television. I flipped to the local morning news. What I saw made the ceramic mug slip from my fingers and shatter against the hardwood floor, splashing hot coffee across my ankles. Sitting perfectly poised on the plush studio couches of Good Morning Chicago was my sister Brittany. Jamal sat close beside her, holding her hand, looking like the ultimate supportive political husband. The chyron flashing across the screen read, "Local influencer raises $250,000 to save father's life." The morning show host leaned forward and asked Brittany how she managed to shoulder such an immense emotional and financial burden. Brittany executed a flawless television performance. She dabbed her eyes with a tissue, careful not to smudge her makeup. She talked about the sleepless nights, the terror of almost losing her dad, and the heartwarming generosity of her online followers. Jamal chimed in, his deep voice resonating with genuine emotion, praising his wife's absolute resilience and unwavering dedication. Then the host pivoted, asking about the emotional toll on the rest of the family. That is when Brittany deployed her lethal tactical strike. She let out a shaky breath, squeezing Jamal's hand tighter. She looked directly into the camera lens, projecting profound sorrow. "It has been a beautiful miracle," she said, her voice trembling with manufactured grief. "But it has also brought out a dark side of our family that I never wanted to speak about publicly." She paused, letting the dramatic tension build perfectly. Jamal looked at her with mild concern, clearly unaware of what she was about to say to the entire city. My older sister Brittany continued, a single tear escaping her eye. She has struggled with severe mental health issues for years. We have tried everything to help her. But when she saw the financial success of the fundraising campaign, something inside her completely snapped. She became deeply jealous. Now she is actively trying to extort us, demanding we give her the charity money, or she will spread malicious lies to ruin my husband's political campaign. I sat frozen, staring at the screen in absolute disbelief. The sociopathic brilliance of her maneuver was staggering. She was actively discrediting me before I could even blow the whistle. By publicly branding me as an unstable, greedy extortionist, she was building an impenetrable wall of deniability around her massive fraud. If I went to the press now, I would just look like the crazy jealous sister fulfilling Brittany's exact prophecy. The host gasped, expressing profound sympathy, while Jamal looked stunned but fiercely protective, putting his arm around his weeping wife. Before the broadcast even cut to a commercial break, my cell phone vibrated violently against the coffee table. Then it buzzed again and again. Within 60 seconds, my phone was a non-stop cacophony of incoming notifications. I picked it up, my hands shaking with a mixture of residual shock and white-hot rage. The extended family group chat, which I had been silently observing for months, was absolutely exploding. My Aunt Carol sent a rapid barrage of texts. "You are an absolute monster, Lauren, trying to steal money from your dying father. You need psychiatric help immediately." My Uncle Greg chimed in, calling me a greedy sociopath who was officially dead to the entire extended family. Cousins I had not spoken to in years sent venomous messages telling me to stay away from the family and threatening to call the police if I ever came near Brittany or Jamal. Patricia had clearly primed them, fanning the flames of their self-righteous fury. But the assault was not limited to my blood relatives. Brittany had cleverly mobilized her massive digital army. Her followers, fiercely loyal and highly reactive, quickly located my personal social media profiles. The notifications bled from private text messages into direct messages and public comments. My professional LinkedIn page, my private Instagram account, everything was suddenly swarmed by hundreds of enraged strangers. They flooded my inbox with vile, hateful vitriol. People told me I was a disgusting human being who deserved to rot in a psychiatric ward. Some messages contained explicit physical threats, describing exactly what they would do to me if I ever tried to harm the sweet, heroic influencer who just saved her father's life. The digital avalanche was designed to completely break my spirit. Patricia and Brittany wanted me to look at my phone and feel the crushing weight of public hatred. They wanted me to collapse into a puddle of anxiety, terrified of the social consequences of speaking out. They wanted me to surrender. I slowly stood up, ignoring the shattered coffee mug and the pool of dark liquid seeping into my floorboards. I walked back into my home office and looked at the neat, pristine stacks of printed evidence covering my desk. The bank routing numbers, the forged hospital invoices, the illegal campaign finance transfers. The hate messages vibrating on my phone were just noise. It was a desperate, noisy smokescreen designed to hide a massive federal crime. I picked up my vibrating phone and held the power button until the screen went completely black. The silence that followed was absolute and empowering. Brittany had just played her biggest card on live television. She had committed herself to the lie in front of the entire city of Chicago, making her inevitable downfall infinitely more public and humiliating. She thought she was isolating me. In reality, she was just building a much taller pedestal to fall from. I grabbed the red marker and turned back to my tactical whiteboard. The smear campaign did not change the mission. It only accelerated the timeline. I needed to get my father out of Patricia's grasp today. I wiped up the spilled coffee and dumped the glass shards. My mind raced through extraction logistics. I needed a private ambulance and a secure facility Patricia could not track. As I mapped driving routes on my secondary monitor, a sharp knock echoed from my front door. It was the frantic pounding of someone who demanded immediate attention. I checked the security camera feed linked to my intercom. Staring back through the lens was Brittany. She was still wearing the designer outfit from the morning news broadcast just an hour ago. She looked impatient, tapping her expensive leather boots against the hallway tile. I felt a surge of cold fury. She had immense nerve showing up at my apartment right after branding me a mentally unstable extortionist on live television. I adjusted my surgical binder to ensure my core was supported, took a steadying breath and unlocked the door. Brittany pushed past me before I even opened the door fully. She breezed into my living room, bringing the overpowering scent of her designer perfume into my modest space. She looked around with visible disdain, curling her upper lip at my second-hand furniture. Outside my window, I could see the street-level parking lot. Gleaming under the harsh Chicago winter sky was a brand new cherry red Tesla. It was parked illegally, blocking the fire hydrant. She had literally driven her stolen charity loot directly to my front door. "You look terrible, Lauren," she said, turning to face me. Her tone was dripping with that same fake sympathy she used on television. "You really should consider taking better care of yourself. The stress of your delusions is clearly taking a toll on your health." I crossed my arms, careful not to press against my healing kidney incision. "Get out of my apartment, Brittany. You already performed your monologue for the morning news. You do not have a camera crew here to applaud your victim act." Brittany dropped the sweet sister routine instantly. Her eyes hardened into a flat, calculating glare. She reached into her expensive handbag and pulled out a crisp, rectangular piece of paper. She stepped forward and shoved it against my chest. I reflexively grabbed it before it fell to the floor. It was a cashier's check drawn from a major corporate bank account. The payee line bore my name. The amount was exactly $5,000. "Take the kidney money, drop the delusions, and disappear," Brittany commanded. Her voice was cold and entirely devoid of emotion. "Mom and I are tired of dealing with your pathetic attempts to ruin our lives. Consider this a generous severance package. You pay your rent, you fix whatever miserable problems you have, and you stay far away from my husband and his campaign. If you accept this check, you sign away any right to speak about Dad or the fundraiser ever again." I stared down at the piece of paper in my hand. $5,000. She valued my left kidney, my physical agony, and my silence at $5,000 while she drove a $100,000 vehicle bought with fraud. The sheer magnitude of her delusion was almost fascinating. She genuinely believed she could buy her way out of federal wire fraud with a pocket change bribe. She thought I was as greedy and superficial as she was. I looked up from the check and met her arrogant gaze. I held the crisp paper between my thumbs and index fingers. I did not say a single word. I simply ripped the check straight down the middle. The sound of the thick paper tearing echoed loudly in the quiet apartment. I placed the two torn halves together and ripped them again, quartering her pathetic bribe. I let the shredded pieces flutter out of my hands. They drifted down, landing on the toes of her expensive leather boots. Brittany stared at the torn paper on the floor. Her jaw tightened and the skin around her eyes flushed with a dark, ugly rage. She stepped directly into my personal space, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You just made the biggest mistake of your miserable life, Lauren. You think you are so brave rejecting my money. You think you hold some kind of high ground. But you are just a stupid, isolated woman who does not understand how power actually works. Mom warned you last night, but clearly you did not listen." She leaned in closer, her eyes wide and manic. "Mom is at the hospital administration office right now. She is actively processing the medical discharge paperwork. We found a place for Dad. It is a severely underfunded state-run care home on the far south side of the city. The place is an absolute nightmare. They have massive staff shortages, critical health code violations, and a notorious reputation for patient neglect. He will be transferred tomorrow morning at exactly 8 o'clock. Mom is moving him there just to punish you. He will be completely isolated, Lauren. You will never be allowed to visit him, and he will not survive a week in that filthy facility." The threat hit me like a physical punch to the gut. They were accelerating the timeline. Patricia was not waiting for me to make a move. She was proactively stripping away my leverage by throwing our father into a death trap. Brittany smiled a cold, triumphant smirk, seeing the genuine horror flash across my face. "You brought this on him, Lauren," she whispered maliciously. "You could have just taken the money and stayed quiet. Now Dad gets to pay the price for your arrogant stubbornness. Have a nice life." Brittany spun around and marched out of my apartment, letting the heavy door slam shut behind her. I heard her expensive boots clicking rapidly down the hallway. A minute later, I heard the distinct electronic chirp of her Tesla unlocking in the street below. She drove away, leaving me standing in the center of my living room with the shredded pieces of her bribe scattered across my floor. My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was currently 9 in the morning. Brittany said the transfer was scheduled for exactly 8 tomorrow morning. That meant my timeline had just imploded. I did not have a few days to carefully orchestrate a stealth extraction. I did not have time to meticulously vet private ambulances or double-check secure routes. I had exactly 23 hours to plan and execute a high-stakes rescue mission. If I failed to get my father out of that luxury rehabilitation suite before Patricia arrived with the state transfer documents, he would be condemned to die in a decaying ward. The stakes had reached an absolute boiling point. I rushed back into my home office, ignoring the burning pain in my side. I grabbed my phone and began dialing. I quickly grabbed my personal cell phone and began dialing. My first emergency call was not to the police. The local authorities would require days to secure a warrant, and the moment a uniform walked into that luxury rehabilitation center, my mother would execute the transfer order. I needed allies who operated inside the healthcare machine. I dialed the direct private office line of Dr. Harrison Reed. He was the lead transplant surgeon who had performed the grueling extraction on my body and successfully implanted my kidney into my father. He fiercely protected his patients' post-operative recovery. I used my status as a living donor to bypass the receptionist and get patched through immediately. When Dr. Reed answered, his voice was sharp and clinical, demanding to know my symptoms. I told him my father was in imminent danger. I explained that Patricia was actively processing paperwork to remove him from the premium post-operative suite and dump him into a severely underfunded state-run nursing facility on the south side of Chicago, simply to punish me. Moving a transplant patient 10 weeks into recovery was essentially a death sentence. The risk of opportunistic infection and organ rejection would skyrocket. He demanded to know why Patricia would authorize such a catastrophic medical decision. I gave him data. I sent a secure encrypted link to his email containing the forged hospital invoices bearing his own department's letterhead alongside the $0 patient responsibility ledger. He opened the files and recognized the forgery, immediately noting that the diagnostic codes were completely wrong for a renal transplant. I told him my sister used them to raise $250,000 online. I could hear his breath hitch. He realized his surgical work and his hospital's reputation were being weaponized to execute a massive financial scam. He promised to lock down my father's physical room, restricting visitor access under the guise of an infection control protocol to buy me a few hours. But a locked door would not stop Patricia from executing a legal transfer. I needed a bigger hammer. I ended the call and dialed the corporate fraud division of my health insurance provider, demanding to speak directly with Special Investigator David Ross. David was a ruthless veteran auditor who had spent his entire career hunting down syndicate insurance scams and corporate embezzlement. When David answered, I did not waste time with pleasantries. I told him I had a fully documented case of felony wire fraud, money laundering, and forged insurance explanation of benefits documents involving a highly publicized crowdfunding campaign. I transmitted the second encrypted data packet. I included the routing numbers tracking the stolen $250,000 into the shell company and the final transaction funneling the stolen funds into a local political action committee. I scheduled an immediate secure video conference linking both Dr. Reed and Special Investigator David Ross into the same encrypted digital room. I sat in front of my monitors, my surgical binder aching, as I laid out the entire conspiracy. I showed the surgeon how his post-operative care plan was being leveraged as an extortion tactic. I showed the fraud investigator how the corporate insurance payouts were being hidden to justify a massive public grift. Both men were absolutely horrified. David Ross leaned close to his webcam, his face tight with professional rage. He confirmed that the documents constituted massive federal offenses. He stated that forging hospital billing records to solicit public donations crossed multiple jurisdictions, including federal wire fraud. Funneling that money into a political campaign elevated the crime to a level that would bring down the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He wanted to freeze the shell company accounts immediately and dispatch a tactical fraud team to the rehabilitation facility. I had to stop him. I stared directly into the webcam and explained the lethal legal trap Patricia had set. My mother held the medical power of attorney. She possessed absolute legal jurisdiction over my father's physical location and healthcare decisions. If David triggered a federal financial freeze right now, Patricia would instantly know I blew the whistle. She would retaliate by pulling my father out of the facility against medical advice before the federal agents could even draft a subpoena. She would sign the release forms, shove him into her car, and dump him at the decaying state facility just to spite me. The bureaucracy of a police raid would be too slow to stop her legal authority as his wife and guardian. Dr. Reed nodded grimly in agreement on the video feed. He explained to David that the sudden shock of a forced transfer would trigger a massive cortisol spike in my father's system. Combined with exposure to a less sterile environment, his body would immediately begin rejecting my kidney. He would not survive the week. They were both legally and medically bound by the terrifying reality of the power of attorney. The evidence of fraud was absolute, but Patricia held a dying man as a legal hostage. "We cannot move against her while she holds that piece of paper," David Ross said, his voice heavy with frustration. "We need to sever her legal authority before we can drop these federal charges." I leaned forward in my ergonomic chair. I told them I already had a plan to sever it. Before my father went into surgery, he had secretly signed a revocation of the medical power of attorney, transferring all medical proxy rights to me in the event of financial abuse. He had hidden it because he was terrified of Patricia finding out. I just needed to physically reach him to execute it and formally file it with the hospital administration board. I told Dr. Reed and David Ross to prepare the necessary federal paperwork and clear the medical red tape on their respective ends. I was going to launch a physical extraction mission tomorrow morning and rip my father right out of her greedy, manipulative hands. I disconnected the encrypted video conference and immediately opened a secure browser window. My first task was securing the physical extraction team. A standard city ambulance would not work. They were bound by strict municipal dispatch protocols and would immediately back down if Patricia or her private security threw a legal fit. I needed a private specialized medical transport unit. I accessed a high-tier medical logistics database and found a private extraction firm that catered to high-net-worth clients, requiring discreet, secure medical transfers. I dialed their emergency dispatch number and wired a $10,000 retainer directly from my personal savings account. It was a massive financial hit, but I did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. My father's life was worth infinitely more than numbers on a screen. The transport coordinator was a former military medic named Carter. I briefed Carter on the exact medical parameters. My father was 10 weeks post-op from a renal transplant. He required strict infection control protocols, a sterilized transport environment, and specialized lifting techniques to avoid tearing his internal sutures. Then I briefed him on the tactical obstacle. Patricia had converted the entire east wing of her massive suburban mansion into a private recovery suite, guarded by a hired security firm. She restricted all visitor access under the guise of an immunocompromised quarantine. I pulled up Patricia's digital calendar, which I had synced to my phone years ago and never deleted. Her schedule was a rigid monument to her social climbing obsession. Every Tuesday afternoon at exactly 1 o'clock, she attended an elite mixer at her exclusive country club. She never missed it. It was her prime opportunity to parade around and solicit high-dollar donations from wealthy socialites. That gave me a razor-thin 90-minute window. I had to breach the mansion, bypass her private security details, securely load a fragile transplant patient into an ambulance, and vanish before she finished her first glass of champagne. I printed the single most important document of my entire plan. Before the transplant surgery, my father had secretly met with an independent notary. He had been terrified of Patricia completely controlling his medical fate if complications arose. He signed a comprehensive legal revocation terminating Patricia's medical power of attorney and transferring absolute medical proxy rights directly to me. He cited a history of financial coercion, rendering her guardianship legally void. I folded the heavy notarized document and slipped it into my suit jacket. This piece of paper was my battering ram. It was the absolute legal authority I needed to blast through her security guards. I packed a sterile medical go bag, grabbed my car keys, and stared at the clock. The countdown had officially started. The next afternoon, the sky over Chicago was a heavy, bruised gray. I sat in the passenger seat of the private medical transport vehicle, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Carter and his two tactical paramedics sat in the back checking the sterile gurney and emergency trauma kits. We turned onto the long paved driveway of the mansion exactly at 1:15. Patricia was safely miles away, mingling at the country club. As the heavy transport vehicle rolled up to the wrought iron security gates, two large men in dark tactical uniforms stepped out of the guardhouse blocking our path. They held up their hands, signaling us to stop. I jumped out of the vehicle before it even shifted into park, ignoring the sharp pull of my healing kidney incision. The lead guard stepped forward, placing a hand on his radio. He stated that the property was under a strict medical quarantine and no visitors were permitted without direct authorization from the homeowner. I did not waste time arguing. I pulled the notarized legal revocation from my jacket and shoved it directly against his chest. I kept my voice icy and commanding. I informed him that I held the absolute legal medical power of attorney for the patient inside. I stated that the homeowner, Patricia, was actively under federal investigation for medical fraud and elder abuse. I told the guard that if he delayed this emergency medical extraction for one more second, I would personally ensure he and his security firm were named as criminal accomplices in a federal kidnapping indictment. The guard looked at the heavy notarized seal on the document and then looked at the aggressive private ambulance idling behind me. He swallowed hard. The threat of federal prison broke his loyalty to Patricia instantly. He stepped back and signaled his partner to open the heavy iron gates. We drove straight up to the main portico. Carter and his team deployed the gurney with military precision. I led them through the grand foyer, sprinting toward the east wing of the mansion. We burst through the double mahogany doors into the makeshift luxury medical suite. My father was lying in a motorized hospital bed, looking incredibly pale and fragile. An IV drip was connected to his arm. When he saw me walking through the doors, flanked by paramedics, his eyes widened in absolute shock and immediate relief. I rushed to his bedside, grabbing his frail hand. I told him we were leaving right now and that Patricia could never hurt him again. Tears welled in his eyes as he nodded weakly. Carter and his team moved with incredible speed and care, transferring him onto the sterilized gurney and securing the specialized medical restraints. We rolled him out of the mansion and loaded him into the back of the transport vehicle, just as my phone buzzed with an incoming call from Patricia. Her security team had finally alerted her. I declined the call, smiled and told Carter to hit the gas. The heavy diesel engine of the transport vehicle roared as Carter slammed his foot on the accelerator. We surged forward, leaving the grand portico of the mansion behind us. The tires gripped the pristine paved driveway, accelerating toward the open wrought iron gates. I sat in the back with the medical team, keeping my eyes locked on the windshield. We were less than 50 yards from the street, and absolute freedom. Then a sleek black Mercedes SUV swerved violently off the main road and blocked the entire exit. The tires shrieked against the asphalt, stopping horizontally across the open gateway. The passenger door flew open. Patricia stepped out. She was still wearing her immaculate country club attire, a tailored white pantsuit, and a string of authentic pearls. But her face was twisted into a mask of pure, unhinged rage. She marched directly to the center of the driveway, standing squarely in front of our heavy transport vehicle. She held her hands up, her palms flat, demanding we stop. Carter slammed on the brakes, throwing us forward against our seatbelts. The ambulance shuddered to a halt mere feet from my mother. I did not wait for her to approach the window. I unbuckled my harness, pushed open the heavy rear doors, and stepped down onto the cold pavement. The winter wind whipped across the lawn as I stood between the ambulance and my mother. "What do you think you are doing, Lauren?" Patricia screamed, her voice echoing across the sprawling manicured lawn. Her eyes darted from me to the medical emblem on the side of the vehicle. "You bring him back inside this instant. You have absolutely no right to remove my husband from his home." I crossed my arms over my chest, protecting my surgical binder from the biting cold. "I have every legal right, Patricia," I said, keeping my voice deadly calm. I hold his medical power of attorney. He is leaving with me. Patricia let out a harsh, venomous laugh. She took a step closer, her heels clicking aggressively on the driveway. You are a delusional fool, she hissed. I hold his medical proxy. I have the signed paperwork in my safe. The security team has already called the local police. You are going to be arrested for kidnapping a vulnerable patient. You are going to prison, Lauren. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the thick folded document. I snapped it open and thrust it toward her face. Look at the date, Mom, I said. Look at the notary seal. Dad revoked your proxy right before the transplant surgery. He knew exactly what you were capable of doing. This document supersedes your outdated paperwork. You have absolutely zero legal authority over his medical care or his physical location. Patricia snatched the document from my hands. Her eyes scanned the legal jargon, the official stamps, and my father's undeniable signature. The color rapidly drained from her face. The realization that she had lost her primary hostage hit her like a physical blow. But Patricia was not the type of woman to surrender gracefully. She crumpled the legal document in her fist and lunged forward, attempting to push past me to reach the rear doors of the ambulance. I am his wife! She shrieked, her pristine country club image completely disintegrating into violent desperation. I will not let you take him. Before she could reach the doors, Carter stepped out of the vehicle. The former military medic was a towering, imposing figure in his dark tactical uniform. He positioned himself squarely blocking her path. His stance was completely unyielding. "Ma'am, step back!" Carter commanded, his voice vibrating with absolute authority. "We have a verified legal proxy authorizing this medical transfer. The patient has clearly communicated his consent to leave this property. If you attempt to interfere with an active medical transport or lay a hand on my team, I will physically restrain you and press federal charges for endangering a critical care patient." Patricia froze. She looked at the massive paramedic, then glared at me with absolute hatred. "I will call my lawyers," she threatened, her voice trembling with rage. "I will tie you up in court for years. I will destroy your life, Lauren." I took a step closer to her, dropping my voice to a lethal whisper. "Go ahead, Mom. Call your lawyers. Call the police right now. Let them come down here. Because the very first thing I will do when the authorities arrive is hand them the forged hospital invoices you signed. I will give them the banking records showing the $250,000 you and Brittany funneled into a shell company. I will show them the illegal political donations you pumped into Jamal's campaign. Do you really want to invite law enforcement to this house today?" The threat of federal prison finally paralyzed her. Patricia stood frozen on the driveway, the wind whipping her perfectly styled hair around her pale face. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She realized she had absolutely no leverage left. I turned my back on her and climbed back into the transport vehicle. I pulled the heavy doors shut, sealing myself and my father safely inside. Carter jumped into the driver's seat, threw the vehicle into reverse, and aggressively maneuvered around the blocking Mercedes. We squeezed through the iron gates and merged onto the main road, leaving Patricia standing completely alone on her freezing suburban lawn, clutching the crumpled piece of paper that ended her reign of terror. Inside the back of this ambulance, the chaotic energy immediately dissipated. The heart monitor tracking my father's vitals steadied into a calm, rhythmic beep. I sat in the jump seat beside his gurney and took his frail hand in mine. He looked up at me, tears silently tracking down his weathered cheeks. "We did it, Dad," I whispered, squeezing his fingers. "You are safe now, I promise." The drive to the northern suburbs took nearly 45 minutes. I had spent hours researching and vetting facilities completely outside Patricia's sphere of influence. We pulled up to a highly secure premium rehabilitation center surrounded by dense winter foliage and a guarded perimeter. The facility specialized in acute post-transplant recovery and operated under the strictest privacy protocols in the entire state of Illinois. Carter and his team swiftly rolled the gurney through the private intake entrance. I met with the facility administrator, a sharp professional woman who understood the gravity of the situation. I registered my father under a private alias, Richard Thomas, utilizing his middle name to ensure his presence would never flag in any public medical registry. Patricia could hire all the private investigators in Chicago, and they would never find a digital trace of him here. I sat at the polished intake desk and pulled out my personal debit card. The required deposit for a private guarded suite with round-the-clock dedicated nursing staff was astronomical. It completely wiped out my remaining life savings. The transaction approved, draining my accounts dry. I did not care. Money was a renewable resource, but my father's life was not. I established uncompromising security protocols with the administration. No visitors were allowed under any circumstances. No phone calls were to be transferred to his room without my explicit verbal authorization. Any attempt by anyone matching Patricia's or Brittany's description to access the facility would result in an immediate police response. I walked down the quiet, sanitized hallway to his new private suite. It was a spacious room with large windows overlooking a serene private garden. The medical staff had already transitioned him into a comfortable bed and connected his IV fluids. He looked incredibly tired, but the overwhelming fear that had haunted his eyes for the past 10 weeks was finally gone. He was secure. The asset was safe. Patricia had lost her human shield, and Brittany had lost her leverage. I stood by the window watching the afternoon light fade across the winter garden. My surgical wound throbbed, a fierce reminder of the battle I was fighting. I pulled my phone from my pocket and looked at the black screen. It was time to initiate the final phase. I was going to drop the evidence directly onto their biggest public stage. I walked out of the secure rehabilitation center and stepped into the freezing Chicago evening. The winter wind bit through my thin wool coat, but I barely felt it. My mind was completely calibrated to the task ahead. I hailed a passing cab and gave the driver an address in the downtown loop. I was not heading home to rest. I was heading to a secure corporate conference room arranged by David Ross, the special fraud investigator from my insurance company. The ride took 40 minutes. I used the time to mentally review every single spreadsheet, every forged signature, and every routing number I was about to hand over to the federal government. Every time the cab hit a pothole, a sharp jolt of pain radiated from my kidney extraction site, but I pushed the agony aside. I walked into the sleek, high-rise building and flashed my identification at the security desk. They expected me. I took the elevator to the 42nd floor, stepping out into a dimly lit lobby. David Ross was waiting for me inside a soundproof glass conference room. He was a sharp, intense man who looked exactly like someone who spent decades hunting white-collar criminals. Sitting next to him was a tall, athletic man in a tailored dark suit. He stood up as I entered. "Lauren, I am Special Agent Harrison Cole with the Federal Bureau of Investigation," David said, making the introductions. Agent Cole specializes in public corruption and campaign finance fraud. I briefed him on the data packets you sent yesterday. I shook his hand and sat down at the heavy oak table. I reached into my leather tote bag and pulled out the thick, bound portfolio I had printed earlier that morning. I did not offer pleasantries. I slid the heavy stack of documents directly across the polished wood. "Everything you need to secure federal indictments against Patricia and Brittany is in this binder," I stated, my voice unwavering. "The digital copies are locked on the encrypted drive I shared with David." Agent Cole opened the portfolio. He bypassed the summary and went straight for the raw data. He was a man who understood numbers. I watched his eyes track across the $0 hospital ledger. I guided them through the timeline with absolute precision. I explained how my premium corporate insurance covered the entire cost of the kidney transplant, leaving a zero balance. I flipped the page and showed them the forged invoice Brittany uploaded to her GoFundMe campaign, claiming a catastrophic debt of $245,000. David Ross tapped his pen against the forged document. "The billing codes are completely fabricated," he noted, his voice laced with professional disgust. "She used generic emergency room codes instead of the specific transplant modifiers. And this digital signature at the bottom belongs to your mother." I nodded, pointing to the metadata analysis on the following page. Patricia generated this document using a basic consumer PDF editor on her home network. I tracked the IP address. She actively manufactured the fraud to legitimize the crowdfunding campaign. Agent Cole turned this page. "We are looking at massive federal wire fraud here," he said, his tone turning deadly serious. "Soliciting $250,000 across state lines, using a digital platform based on forged medical documents, is a guaranteed felony indictment. But the campaign finance aspect is what brings my division into play." "Walk me through the shell company." I pulled up the reverse lookup data. They funneled the GoFundMe withdrawals directly into a limited liability company registered 4 months ago called the Hope Foundation. Brittany is the primary owner. Patricia is the secondary signatory. They used this account to launder the stolen charity funds. I showed them the bank statements proving they spent a portion of the money on luxury vehicles and designer clothing. Then I pointed to the final highlighted transaction on the ledger. 2 weeks ago, they initiated a single wire transfer of $150,000, I said, locking eyes with the federal agent. The destination was the Registered Political Action Committee for City Councilman Jamal. Agent Cole let out a low whistle. $150,000 of laundered medical fraud money injected straight into a municipal election campaign. This is incredibly destructive. Councilman Jamal built his entire platform on absolute transparency and anti-corruption. Does he know about the source of these funds? I shook my head firmly. Jamal is completely in the dark. He is a good man who married a sociopath. Brittany lied to him. She likely told him she secured a massive private donor or funneled her own influencer sponsorships into his war chest. If this money stays in his political accounts when the Federal Election Commission audits him, his career will be destroyed, and he will face federal prison time for a crime he did not commit. Agent Cole closed the portfolio and folded his hands on the table. "You have handed us a perfectly packaged federal case, Lauren. We have the forged documents, the money trail, and the metadata linking Patricia directly to the crime. I can take this to a federal judge tomorrow morning and have arrest warrants signed by noon. We can pick them up quietly at their suburban home and freeze all associated bank accounts before they even know they are under investigation." I felt a cold surge of adrenaline. The rational part of my brain knew Agent Cole was offering the standard operating procedure for white-collar crimes. A quiet arrest, a sealed indictment, and a lengthy court battle behind closed doors. But Patricia and Brittany did not operate in the shadows. They thrived on public perception. They had spent the entire morning dragging my name through the mud on local television, framing me as a mentally unstable extortionist. If the FBI arrested them quietly, Patricia would immediately spin the narrative. She would hire elite public relations firms to paint themselves as victims of a government overreach or a tragic misunderstanding. She would drag out the legal process for years, draining the remaining stolen funds to pay for high-powered defense attorneys. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the polished oak table. "I cannot allow a quiet arrest, Agent Cole." David Ross frowned. "Lauren, this is not a negotiation. These are federal crimes. We dictate how the takedown happens." I kept my gaze locked on the FBI agent. "You want to secure a conviction without a drawn-out public relations nightmare," I said, my voice dropping to a calculated whisper. "If you arrest them quietly, they will play the victim. They will drag Jamal's name through the mud, claiming he orchestrated the campaign finance fraud and threw his wife under the bus to save himself. You know how these political scandals play out in the media. Jamal is an innocent politician running a grassroots campaign against a well-funded establishment. If Patricia controls the narrative, she will absolutely destroy him to save her own skin." Agent Cole narrowed his eyes. "What exactly are you proposing, Lauren?" I sat back in my chair, the plan fully materialized in my mind. Jamal is hosting his biggest campaign fundraising gala this coming Saturday night. It is a massive, high-profile event at a luxury hotel downtown. Every major political donor, every local news anchor, and every prominent socialite in Chicago will be in that ballroom. Brittany is scheduled to be the keynote speaker. She is going to stand on that stage wearing a dress bought with stolen charity money, and she is going to tell a room full of millionaires how she saved her father's life. David Ross shook his head slowly, realizing what I was implying. "You want to drop this evidence at the gala." I want to detonate it, I corrected him. I am going to walk into that ballroom and expose their entire operation on the biggest public stage they have ever built. I am going to show their wealthy donors exactly where the GoFundMe money went. I am going to force Jamal to see the truth in front of the press so he can immediately distance himself and save his integrity. And when the entire room turns against them, I want you waiting at the doors with handcuffs. Agent Cole stared at me for a long, heavy moment. The silence in the conference room was absolute. He looked at the pristine data portfolio, then back at me. As a federal agent, he was trained to mitigate chaos, but as a seasoned investigator, he recognized the sheer tactical brilliance of trapping a narcissistic predator in the spotlight they craved. We cannot officially sanction a public confrontation like that, he said, his tone shifting to something much more dangerous and aligned. However, if we happen to be executing valid federal arrest warrants at that exact hotel on Saturday night, we cannot control what happens in the ballroom before we enter. I smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had managed in 10 weeks. The trap was set. Agent Cole looked at David Ross. He then looked back at me. We had laid all the cards on the table. They had the evidence. I had the extraction. The only thing left was execution. The FBI operates on protocol. They prefer to strike at dawn, surrounding a suburban house with dark SUVs, executing search warrants, and taking suspects into custody before the neighbors even have time to pour their coffee. Agent Cole explained this standard procedure to me, his voice calm and authoritative. He wanted to arrest Patricia and Brittany on Friday morning quietly, cleanly, with minimal disruption. I shook my head. A quiet arrest gives them exactly what they need, I explained. It gives them time to spin the narrative. If you take them in on Friday morning, by Friday afternoon, Patricia will have hired the best crisis PR firm in Chicago. They'll release a statement claiming it's a misunderstanding, a tragic misinterpretation of complex medical billing. Brittany will go on Instagram Live crying about how the government is persecuting a family that just went through a medical trauma. They will use the weekend news cycle to paint themselves as victims, and by Monday, Jamal's political career will be collateral damage. They'll throw him under the bus to save themselves, claiming he mismanaged the campaign funds. David Ross leaned forward, his brow furrowed. What are you suggesting, Lauren? We can't just let them walk around knowing what we know. I'm suggesting we use their own vanity against them, I said. Jamal's re-election campaign is hosting its biggest fundraising gala this Saturday night at the Drake Hotel. It's a massive event. Every major political donor, every local news anchor, every prominent socialite in Chicago will be in that ballroom. And Brittany is the keynote speaker. She is scheduled to give a speech about family sacrifice and community support to try and leverage her GoFundMe fame into campaign donations. I paused, letting the weight of the scenario sink in. If you arrest them on Friday, you give them control of the story, I continued. But if you wait until Saturday night, you let them build their own stage. You let Brittany stand up in front of the very people she's defrauding. You let her wear a designer gown bought with stolen charity money. And right when she's at the height of her performance, we drop the evidence. We show the entire room, including the press, exactly who she is. We don't just arrest them. We expose them so completely that no PR firm in the world can spin it. We let Jamal see the truth in real time, surrounded by his supporters, so he can distance himself immediately and unequivocally. Agent Cole sat back in his chair, his expression unreadable. He tapped his pen against the polished wood of the conference table. The silence in the room was thick, heavy with the implications of what I was proposing. It was highly irregular, potentially chaotic, and completely outside standard FBI protocol. We can't officially sanction a public confrontation like that, Agent Cole said, finally, his voice carefully measured. The Bureau does not participate in theatrical takedowns. I held his gaze. I'm not asking you to participate in the theater, I replied. I'm asking you to be in the lobby of the Drake Hotel at exactly 8 o'clock on Saturday night to execute valid federal arrest warrants. Whatever happens in the ballroom before you enter is completely out of your control. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of David Ross's mouth. He looked at Agent Cole. She's got a point, Harrison. If the evidence happens to be presented to the donors before the arrest, it certainly makes the prosecution's job easier regarding public perception. Agent Cole stood up, closing the evidence portfolio. We will have agents positioned at the Drake Hotel on Saturday evening to execute the warrants. He looked directly at me. I strongly advise you not to do anything that could compromise the integrity of the evidence or endanger anyone in that ballroom. I won't endanger anyone, I assured him. I'm just going to show some slides. The meeting adjourned. The federal machinery was officially in motion. I had secured my father's safety and initiated the legal takedown. Now I needed to orchestrate the Trojan horse. The Drake Hotel is a historic, opulent venue known for its grand ballrooms and state-of-the-art audiovisual capabilities. In my line of work, I deal with complex digital networks, but infiltrating a high-security hotel AV system required a different kind of expertise. I needed someone who understood event production tech inside and out. I called an old colleague from my early days in data analytics, a guy named Marcus, who had left the corporate world to start his own event production company. Marcus owed me a massive favor from a contract dispute I helped him untangle years ago. I met him late Thursday night at a dingy diner on the outskirts of the city. I didn't give him the full details. I just told him I needed temporary, untraceable access to the projection system in the Gold Coast Ballroom at the Drake Hotel for a specific event on Saturday night. I needed to override the main presentation feed remotely from my phone, and I needed it to be irreversible from the control booth once initiated. Marcus stirred his coffee, looking at me skeptically. You're asking me to help you hijack a political fundraiser's AV system. Do you know how illegal that is if we get caught? I slid an envelope across the table containing a substantial amount of cash, the last of my emergency reserves. I'm not asking you to hack the Pentagon, Marcus. I'm asking you to set up a wireless relay that overrides their HDMI input. I need a 10-minute window. That's it. And I guarantee you won't get caught because the people hosting the event are going to be leaving in handcuffs before they can even think about calling IT. He stared at the envelope, then at me. He knew I didn't bluff. He pocketed the cash and pulled out his laptop. He spent the next 2 hours sketching out a technical schematic, explaining how he could exploit a vulnerability in the hotel's wireless projection network. He would need physical access to the ballroom hours before the event to install a discrete bypass dongle on the primary projector feed. I can get you the access I promised. On Friday afternoon, the day before the gala, I used a burner phone to call the hotel's event management office. Playing the role of a stressed assistant from Jamal's campaign, I frantically explained that we had a last-minute video presentation that needed to be tested on the ballroom's main screens. I told them a tech specialist named Marcus would be arriving in an hour to run a quick diagnostic. Given the high-profile nature of the event, the hotel staff accommodated the request without a second thought. Marcus walked into the Gold Coast Ballroom at 2 o'clock on Friday afternoon, flashing a fake campaign badge. He spent 15 minutes testing the projection system, during which he seamlessly installed the wireless bypass dongle directly into the primary control rack. He texted me a secure access code and walked out. I spent Friday night in my apartment staring at the encrypted files on my desktop. I compiled the evidence into a stark, undeniable slide deck. Slide 1. The $0 hospital bill. Slide 2. The forged GoFundMe invoice with Patricia's digital signature highlighted. Slide 3. The bank routing numbers tracking the stolen $250,000 to the Hope Foundation, LLC. Slide 4. The $150,000 wire transfer from the shell company directly into Jamal's political action committee. I tested the remote override sequence on my phone dozens of times. It worked flawlessly. The payload was loaded. The delivery mechanism was secure. Saturday morning arrived with a clear, freezing sky. I spent the day finalizing my own preparations. I didn't want to look like a victim or a crazed, disgruntled sister. I needed to project absolute authority. I bought a sharp, tailored black suit, pristine white shirt, and sensible heels. I tied my hair back into a sleek, severe style. I looked like a corporate assassin. At 6 o'clock, I received a text from Agent Cole. Teams are in position, awaiting visual confirmation. At 7 o'clock, I ordered a black car to take me to the Drake Hotel. I sat in the back seat, the city lights reflecting off the window, my hand resting on the phone in my pocket. The pain in my side had settled into a dull, persistent ache, a constant physical reminder of the betrayal that brought me here. I had given a piece of my body to save my family. Tonight, I was going to use the truth to destroy them. The black town car coasted to a smooth stop in front of the historic Drake Hotel. Valets in crisp uniforms rushed to open doors for Chicago's elite, ushering them out of the freezing winter wind and into the opulent warmth of the political event of the season. I stepped out onto the pavement, the cold air hitting my face like a refreshing shock. I adjusted the lapels of my tailored black suit. It was a flawless, sharp silhouette that demanded respect and projected absolute authority. Beneath the fine wool fabric, my surgical binder held my healing abdomen tight. The physical ache of my missing kidney was still there, but the fierce, coursing adrenaline rendered it completely irrelevant. I walked through the revolving brass doors, my heels clicking rhythmically against the polished marble floors, stepping directly into the belly of the beast. The Gold Coast Ballroom was a spectacle of extraordinary wealth and political influence. Crystal chandeliers cast a dazzling fractured light over hundreds of prominent guests. Local politicians in bespoke tuxedos mingled with socialites draped in expensive couture gowns. Waiters glided silently through the crowd, balancing silver trays of champagne flutes and delicate hors d'oeuvres. At the far end of the room, a massive stage had been erected, flanked by towering banners prominently displaying Jamal's campaign slogan. Reporters from local news networks had set up their heavy broadcast cameras on elevated risers at the back, perfectly positioned to capture every single moment of the highly anticipated keynote address. I grabbed a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray and blended into the periphery of the room, a silent predator scanning the environment. It did not take long to spot my mother. Patricia was holding court near the grand staircase, entirely in her element. She wore a stunning emerald green evening gown that radiated expensive arrogance, laughing brightly at a joke made by a prominent city developer. She looked exactly like the powerful, untouchable matriarch she had always pretended to be. I watched her sip her champagne, basking in the warm glow of the stolen political spotlight. Then she turned her head. Her eyes swept across the crowd and locked directly onto mine. The transition was instantaneous. The artificial warmth vanished from her face, replaced by a rigid, visceral panic. The color completely drained from her cheeks, leaving her makeup looking like a painted mask. She abruptly excused herself from the wealthy developer and frantically signaled to two massive private security guards stationed near the ballroom entrance. I did not move. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my water, holding her terrified gaze as she marched across the carpeted floor, with the two large men trailing closely behind her. "What do you think you are doing here?" Patricia hissed, her voice vibrating with a frantic, suppressed rage. She positioned her body to block me from the view of the other guests, her eyes darting nervously toward the reporters. "You need to leave this instant. You are not ruining this night for your sister." I offered her a cold, unyielding smile. "Good evening, Mom. The ballroom looks stunning. You really spared no expense for this charade." "Remove her!" Patricia commanded, turning to the security guards. Her voice was sharp and desperate. "She is not on the guest list. She is a trespasser, and she is actively harassing my family. Throw her out right now." The larger of the two guards stepped forward, raising his hand to grasp my shoulder. "Ma'am, I am going to have to ask you to step outside," he said, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I calmly reached into the inner breast pocket of my tailored suit jacket. Patricia's breath hitched, a flash of genuine fear crossing her face, perhaps imagining I was about to pull out the federal indictments right there in the lobby. Instead, I retrieved a heavy gold-embossed cardstock envelope. I handed it directly to the security guard. "I believe you will find my credentials in order," I stated, my voice ringing with unwavering confidence. The guard opened the envelope and pulled out a platinum-tier VIP donor ticket. It was the highest level of access available for the gala, granting premium entry to the main ballroom, the private donor reception, and the backstage VIP lounge. I had purchased it 2 days ago, using a secure, untraceable shell, LLC, completely bypassing my family's heavily guarded guest list. The guard scanned the barcode printed on the back of the ticket with his handheld device. The machine emitted a cheerful, validating chime. The screen flashed bright green. "The ticket is valid, Mrs. Williams," the guard said, handing it back to me and stepping away. "She is a registered platinum donor. We cannot remove her." Patricia stared at the ticket, her jaw tight with mounting horror. She realized instantly that she had completely lost control of the perimeter. She could not cause a scene to have a platinum donor forcibly ejected without drawing the attention of every single journalist in the room. I leaned in, slightly lowering my voice, so only she could hear the lethal promise in my words. "Enjoy the show, Mom," I whispered. "It is going to be a night you will never forget." I sidestepped her frozen form and walked deeper into the ballroom, leaving her standing powerless near the entrance. The energy in the room was shifting. The ambient music faded out, replaced by a commanding voice, echoing over the premium sound system, asking the guests to take their seats. I found an empty chair near the back of the room, perfectly aligned with a clear, unobstructed view of the massive projection screens hanging behind the main podium. Jamal took the stage first. The crowd erupted into enthusiastic applause. He looked genuinely moved, his smile radiating an authentic, honest gratitude. He gripped the edges of the wooden podium and delivered a short, humble speech about the power of community, the necessity of transparent leadership, and his vision for a safer, more equitable Chicago. He truly believed in the movement he was building. He truly believed the money funding this luxurious event came from honest, hardworking citizens. It was almost tragic to watch a good man being manipulated so thoroughly. But none of this would be possible without my rock, my foundation, and my inspiration, Jamal said, his voice thickening with emotion. "I want to introduce a woman who embodies the very essence of sacrifice. When her family faced an insurmountable crisis, she did not hesitate. She rallied a community, she fought against the odds, and she saved her father's life. Ladies and gentlemen, my beautiful wife, Brittany." The applause was deafening as Brittany walked out from the wings. She looked absolutely breathtaking. She was wearing a stunning floor-length designer gown, covered in intricate hand-stitched beadwork. It was a dress that radiated wealth and exclusivity. I knew exactly how much that dress cost. It was a $10,000 garment purchased directly with the stolen charity funds paid for by innocent people who thought they were buying life-saving medication for a dying man. Brittany stepped up to the microphone, placing her hands delicately on the podium. The entire ballroom went dead silent, captivated by her manufactured presence. She looked out over the sea of wealthy donors, her eyes glistening beautifully under the harsh stage lights. She took a deep, shaky breath, executing her performance with flawless sociopathic precision. "Thank you," Brittany began, her voice trembling perfectly on cue. "When we got the call that my father's kidneys were failing, my entire world completely collapsed. The fear of losing him was paralyzing. But the financial terror of those medical bills was almost worse. We were staring into an abyss of crushing, insurmountable debt. I spent countless sleepless nights crying, wondering how I could possibly save my family from losing everything." She paused, letting a single perfectly timed tear track down her cheek. She reached up and wiped it away with a delicate, trembling finger. The wealthy donors in the front row watched her with rapt, sympathetic attention. But I realized I could not give up. Brittany continued, her voice growing stronger, building the dramatic arc of her lie. "I poured every ounce of my soul into raising those funds. I sacrificed my time, my energy, and my own peace of mind, because family is everything. And thanks to the beautiful, overwhelming generosity of so many people, we paid those bills. We saved my father." The crowd murmured in collective awe. I sat in the back row, my face in a motionless mask, my thumb resting lightly on the screen of my smartphone, hovering directly over the digital trigger. "That is the same relentless dedication my husband brings to this city," Brittany declared, pivoting seamlessly from her fake medical tragedy into a high-pressure political pitch. "Jamal fights for this community with the same fierce, unwavering loyalty I fought for my father. But he cannot do it alone. We need your support tonight. We need your generous donations to ensure that honest, transparent leadership continues to thrive in Chicago. Please open your hearts and open your checkbooks." The audience broke into thunderous standing applause. Brittany smiled, basking in the absolute glory of her stolen spotlight. It was time. I pressed the button on my phone. I tapped the screen of my smartphone. The digital command shot through the hotel's wireless network, bypassing every security protocol straight into the primary control rack Marcus had rigged. I didn't hold my breath. I didn't hesitate. I just watched the stage. Behind Brittany, the massive high-definition projector screens suddenly flickered. The bright, polished campaign logo displaying Jamal's name vanished in a burst of digital static. The sudden visual disruption caught the attention of the front-row donors. A few people murmured, pointing at the screens. Brittany, oblivious to the glitch behind her, continued her impassioned plea for campaign donations. Then the static cleared. The first image materialized in brilliant high resolution. It was not a campaign video. It was a scanned copy of a certified medical document. The words "Living Organ Donor Certificate" were emblazoned across the top. Below that, in stark, undeniable text, was my full name, Lauren Williams, and the exact date of the kidney extraction surgery. The audience fell completely silent. The sudden juxtaposition of a medical certificate at a political fundraiser was jarring. Brittany, noticing the shift in the room's energy, finally turned around. She looked up at the massive screens. Her jaw literally dropped. The microphone slipped an inch in her trembling hand. The presentation was not static. I had programmed the slideshow to cycle automatically, leaving each piece of evidence on the screen just long enough for the wealthy, educated crowd to read the numbers and understand the context. The screen shifted. A highly detailed hospital billing ledger appeared. I had highlighted the total cost of Richard's transplant surgery. I had also highlighted the insurance payout column, showing my corporate policy covering 100% of the procedure. The final highlighted circle was drawn around the patient responsibility line. It read exactly $0. Brittany panicked. She slapped her hand over the microphone, attempting to muffle her voice as she screamed toward the wings for the AV team to cut the feed. "Turn it off!" she shrieked, her carefully crafted influencer persona shattering instantly. "Turn the screens off right now!" But the screens didn't turn off. They shifted again. The crowd gasped audibly. Displayed on the massive screens was the forged GoFundMe invoice, the document Brittany had used to solicit $250,000 in charity. I had overlaid my metadata analysis, highlighting Patricia's digital signature and the consumer-grade PDF software used to manufacture the fake debt. The elite donors in the room, many of whom were lawyers and business executives, recognized a fraudulent document immediately. The murmurs in the ballroom escalated into shocked, outraged conversations. People were standing up, pulling out their phones. The local news reporters at the back of the room suddenly sprang into action, swiveling their heavy broadcast cameras away from the podium and aiming them directly at the projection screens. The final sequence began. The screens displayed the bank statements from the Hope Foundation, LLC. The routing numbers were clear. The expenditures were highlighted in bright red: $30,000 to a luxury car dealership, $10,000 to high-end boutiques in Chicago. A woman in the second row pointed directly at Brittany. "That's the designer she's wearing," the woman said loudly, her voice cutting through the rising chaos. "She bought her dress with charity money." Brittany backed away from the podium, her face pale with absolute terror. She looked out at the sea of angry, betrayed faces. The final slide dropped. It was the banking wire transfer showing exactly $150,000 funneled directly into Jamal's political action committee. The evidence of federal campaign finance fraud hung above her head like a guillotine. The ballroom erupted. The initial gasp of collective shock quickly dissolved into a cacophony of frantic, overlapping voices. High society donors, realizing their substantial contributions had been funneled into a massive medical scam, pointed furiously at the screens. The local press corps, sensing the political scandal of the decade, surged forward like a pack of wolves. Camera flashes strobed relentlessly, illuminating Brittany's horrified, frozen face in harsh bursts of white light. She stood paralyzed at the podium, trapped exactly where she had intended to shine. Patricia broke the paralysis. She lunged forward from her position near the grand staircase, her emerald gown catching on a chair as she desperately pushed through the chaotic crowd. "Cut the power!" she shrieked, her voice cracking with pure, unadulterated panic. Her polished matriarchal facade was completely gone, replaced by the frantic desperation of a cornered criminal. "Somebody cut the power to the screens." She waved wildly toward the back of the room, demanding action from the hotel staff. Two AV technicians rushed toward the control booth only to find the heavy doors locked from the inside and the digital controls completely unresponsive to their overrides. Marcus had done his job flawlessly. The system was locked down, and the damning evidence continued to cycle on the massive screens, a relentless loop of their federal crimes. I stepped out from the shadows of the back row. I moved with slow, deliberate precision, a stark contrast to the frantic energy consuming the ballroom. The crowd parted instinctively, recognizing the sudden commanding shift in the room's dynamic. I walked straight down the center aisle, my black suit sharp against the sea of panicked evening wear. A stunned reporter from a local news affiliate stood near the front, holding a wireless microphone, staring slack-jawed at the projection screens. I reached out and calmly took the microphone from his hand. He didn't even try to stop me. The microphone crackled slightly as I turned it on, the sound echoing through the massive ballroom. The chaotic chatter immediately died down. Hundreds of eyes shifted from the screens to me, standing dead center, holding the room hostage. "My name is Lauren Williams," I said, my voice echoing calm and unwavering. "I am the living organ donor. The woman standing on the stage is my sister, and the woman screaming in the aisle is my mother. The money you donated did not save my father. The money you donated bought a Tesla, a designer dress, and a political campaign." Patricia screamed, trying to launch herself toward me, but a group of horrified donors physically blocked her path. She thrashed against them, desperate to silence me. "But financial fraud isn't the worst of it," I continued, my voice dropping to a lethal carrying register. "They didn't just steal your money, they held a dying man hostage to keep their secret." I pulled my smartphone from my pocket and held it directly up to the microphone. I hit play. The audio wasn't perfectly clean. It was the raw, unedited dashcam recording from the private medical transport vehicle. But my father's frail, terrified voice carried clearly through the ballroom's speakers. "She wouldn't let me use the phone." Richard's voice echoed thick with exhaustion and fear. "She said if I tried to tell Lauren about the GoFundMe money, she'd stop the nurses. She kept the food away yesterday. Said I needed to learn how to be quiet. She had me locked down." The audio stopped. The silence in the ballroom was absolute, heavy with profound collective revulsion. The donors weren't just angry about their money anymore, they were horrified by the pure sociopathic cruelty. I lowered the phone, locking eyes with Brittany, who was now openly weeping on the stage, completely destroyed. The crushing silence in the massive ballroom was finally broken by a sharp, ragged gasp from the stage. All eyes shifted from my steady gaze to Jamal. The charismatic, commanding city councilman looked completely unrecognizable. He stood frozen a few feet away from the podium, his posture rigid, his eyes locked onto the massive projection screens above him. The final slide remained illuminated, searing the exact dollar amount of the illegal campaign transfer into his mind. $150,000. Jamal had built his entire political career on the unyielding promise of absolute transparency. He was a man of fierce integrity who had fought tooth and nail against Chicago's notorious corruption. Now the undeniable evidence glowing above his head proved that his own wife had funded his campaign with blood money stolen from sympathetic donors. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal washed over him, draining the color from his face. He looked down from the screen and stared at Brittany. Brittany collapsed to her knees on the stage, her $10,000 designer gown pooling around her in a pathetic heap. She reached her trembling hands out toward him, her crying face twisted in desperate, manipulative panic. She mouthed the word "please" over and over, begging him to save her, begging him to deploy his political power to protect her from the catastrophic reality I had just unleashed. She expected the fiercely loyal husband to shield his wife from the angry mob. She severely miscalculated the depth of his honor. Jamal did not reach back. He did not drop to his knees to comfort her. The profound shock in his eyes rapidly hardened into absolute icy resolve. He adjusted his suit jacket, his jaw clenching with righteous fury, and took slow, deliberate strides across the stage. Brittany sobbed louder, grabbing at the fabric of his trousers as he passed, but he stepped around her as if she were nothing more than a toxic obstacle. He approached the podium and firmly grasped the microphone, pulling it from the stand. The heavy feedback whined briefly before he spoke. His voice did not tremble. It boomed through the ballroom with the heavy, undeniable weight of a seasoned leader taking absolute control of a crisis. "Hotel security," Jamal commanded, his deep voice cutting sharply through the rising murmurs of the outraged wealthy donors. "Lock the main doors to this ballroom immediately. Do not let a single person exit this space tonight." The security guards stationed at the back of the room hesitated for only a fraction of a second before complying, pulling the heavy brass handles shut with a resounding click. Patricia shrieked in terror from the center aisle, but Jamal ignored her completely. He pulled his personal cell phone from his inner suit pocket, holding the microphone steady with his other hand. He looked out over the crowd, his face a mask of pure, unyielding justice. "Nobody leaves," Jamal announced to the stunned, breathless room. "I am calling the FBI myself." The wail of sirens pierced the thick, heavy silence of the ballroom. The sound was distant at first, bleeding through the heavy walls of the Drake Hotel, but it rapidly multiplied, transforming into a chaotic, overlapping symphony of emergency vehicles converging on the building. The flashing red and blue lights reflected against the massive windows, casting frantic, spinning shadows across the opulent crystal chandeliers. The heavy brass doors at the back of the ballroom, which Jamal had ordered locked only moments ago, were suddenly thrust open. Agent Cole strode into the room, flanked by 6 federal agents, wearing dark windbreakers with FBI emblazoned in stark yellow letters across the back. They moved with absolute terrifying precision. They did not shout. They did not draw their weapons. They simply marched down the center aisle, parting the sea of wealthy donors like Moses parting the Red Sea. Agent Cole bypassed me completely, his eyes locked on the stage. He approached the podium where Brittany was still kneeling in her ruined designer gown, sobbing hysterically. 2 agents stepped up beside her. Brittany Williams, Agent Cole, said, his voice carrying the full crushing weight of federal authority. "You are under arrest for wire fraud and violations of the Federal Election Campaign Act." Brittany shrieked as the cold steel handcuffs snapped shut around her wrists. The sound of the locking mechanism was sharp and final. They pulled her to her feet, the intricate beadwork of her $10,000 dress snagging and tearing as they marched her roughly toward the exit. The local press corps, recovering from their shock, swarmed the aisle, their camera flashes detonating in a relentless, blinding storm. Every single tear, every ruined contour of her face was captured in high definition. Patricia, witnessing the absolute destruction of her golden child, completely lost whatever fragile grip she still had on reality. She lunged forward, her emerald gown trailing behind her, screaming obscenities at the federal agents. "You can't do this!" she roared, her voice cracking into a desperate feral screech. "We are a respectable family. This is a mistake." She grabbed Agent Cole's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his jacket. It was the worst mistake she could have possibly made. 2 female agents immediately engaged her, twisting her arms sharply behind her back. Patricia fought them, thrashing wildly and screaming about her status, her country club, her husband. The agents slammed her face down onto a high-top cocktail table. A crystal champagne flute shattered, sending shards of glass and expensive liquor raining onto the carpet. The silver handcuffs locked around Patricia's wrists, pinning her against the table. In that single violent moment, the matriarch's pristine, carefully curated public image was permanently, irreversibly destroyed. The fallout the next morning was swift and absolute. Jamal, true to the fierce integrity that had defined his political career, did not hesitate. He filed for divorce before the courthouse even opened. By 10 o'clock, he held a press conference on the steps of City Hall. Looking utterly exhausted, but resolutely honest, he publicly apologized to the city of Chicago. He immediately relinquished the entire balance of his campaign war chest, placing the funds into a federal escrow account to reimburse every single donor who had contributed to the fraudulent GoFundMe campaign. Then, with his head held high, he officially suspended his city council race. He lost the election, but he kept his soul. Later that afternoon, the federal government moved on Patricia's empire. A judge signed an emergency injunction, freezing all of her bank accounts, investment portfolios, and real estate assets, including the sprawling suburban mansion. The investigation into the forged hospital bills and the money laundering shell company had only just begun, but the financial execution was instantaneous. She was entirely broke. 72 hours after the gala, I walked through the heavy metal detectors of the Cook County Jail. The transition from the opulent ballroom of the Drake Hotel to the sterile concrete walls of the federal holding facility was absolute. The air inside smelled of industrial bleach and stale sweat. I sat in a cramped visitor cubicle separated by a thick pane of reinforced plexiglass. The heavy steel door on the opposite side buzzed open. A corrections officer escorted Patricia and Brittany into the room. They were stripped of their designer gowns, their expensive jewelry, and their manufactured dignity. They both wore oversized, stiff orange jumpsuits. Brittany's face was blotchy, her carefully highlighted hair tangled and unwashed. Patricia looked hollow, the arrogant spark in her eyes entirely extinguished by the reality of a concrete cell and a metal toilet. They sat down on the bolted metal stools, staring at me through the scuffed plexiglass. For a moment, nobody spoke. I just looked at them, taking in the absolute destruction of their false empire. "Lauren, please," Patricia choked out, pressing her trembling hands against the glass. "You have to fix this. You have to tell the federal prosecutors that this was all a terrible misunderstanding. Tell them we had your permission to handle the finances." Brittany leaned forward, tears spilling down her face. She looked desperate, frantic, completely stripped of her influencer arrogance. "I cannot survive in here, Lauren. The food is disgusting. The other women are terrifying. You have to call Agent Cole. Tell him I was just trying to help Dad. Tell him we are family." "Family," I repeated, letting the word hang in the harsh fluorescent light of the visitation room. "Yes, family." Patricia sobbed, her voice echoing off the concrete walls. "We share the same blood, Lauren. You cannot let your own mother and sister rot in a federal prison. I gave you life. We have to stick together. We can pay the money back. We can sell the house, sell the cars. Just drop the charges. Please, I am begging you." They were playing the only card they had left. The family card. It was the same card they used to guilt me, isolate me, and manipulate me my entire life. They expected the old Lauren to surface the daughter who craved their approval so desperately she would endure any abuse to get it. They expected me to fold. I sat back in my hard plastic chair. I felt the smooth, healed skin over my kidney extraction site pressing against the fabric of my tailored suit. I did not feel pity. I did not feel guilt. I felt absolutely nothing for the two women sitting across from me. "I do not have the power to drop federal charges," I stated, my voice echoing with icy analytical precision. "You committed wire fraud, money laundering, and campaign finance violations. The FBI does not care about our family dynamics. The federal government does not accept apologies." Brittany buried her face in her hands, letting out a loud, pathetic wail. Patricia stared at me, a flash of her old familiar venom cutting through her tears. "You did this to us," Patricia hissed, her true nature surfacing. "You set us up. You ruined my life over a stupid kidney." I leaned forward, bringing my face just inches from the plexiglass. I looked directly into my mother's eyes, stripping away decades of her gaslighting and control. "No, Mom," I said, my voice dropping to a lethal, unwavering pitch. "You ruined your own lives. You looked at my physical sacrifice, my bleeding body, and you saw nothing but a lucrative payday. You used my father's failing organs to launder money for your own vanity. Family protects your heart. They don't harvest your organs for a Tesla." Patricia recoiled as if she had been physically struck. Brittany stopped crying and stared at me in horrified silence. "I came here today for one reason," I continued, standing up from the metal chair. "I came to look you in the eyes and tell you that I am completely done. I am changing my phone number. I am blocking your legal counsel. I will never visit you in a federal penitentiary. You are entirely on your own. I turned my back on them and walked toward the heavy steel door. I could hear Patricia screaming my name, banging her fists against the plexiglass, begging me to come back. The sound was muffled by the thick door as it clicked firmly shut behind me. I walked out of the Cook County Jail and stepped into the crisp, freezing Chicago air. The toxic weight I had carried for 33 years was finally permanently gone. 6 months later, the brutal Chicago winter had melted into a bright, vibrant spring. The sun beat down warmly on the paved paths of Millennium Park. I pushed a lightweight, comfortable wheelchair along the edge of the sparkling lake. Sitting in the chair wrapped in a light sweater was my father. Richard looked significantly older, his hair completely white, but the color had returned to his cheeks. His new kidney, my kidney, was functioning flawlessly. Removed from Patricia's daily psychological torment and the stress of her financial manipulations, his recovery had skyrocketed. He smiled as he watched the sailboats gliding across the blue water, pointing out a particularly fast one to me. My physical healing was complete. The jagged red scar on my abdomen had faded into a smooth silver line, a badge of honor I wore with absolute pride. My professional life had rebounded with spectacular force. After the FBI cleared my name and utilized my forensic data tracking to secure their convictions, my corporate employer not only reinstated me with full back pay, but promoted me. I was now the director of data analytics, commanding my own department and setting my own hours. Patricia and Brittany had both pled guilty to multiple federal charges. They were currently serving out lengthy sentences in a federal prison. Their assets were seized, the mansion was auctioned off, and the stolen GoFundMe money was fully refunded to every single donor. Jamal's divorce was finalized quickly, and he had recently announced a new campaign for a higher political office, his reputation strengthened by his swift, honest handling of the crisis. I parked my father's wheelchair near a sprawling oak tree sitting on a wooden bench beside him. I handed him a warm cup of coffee, and we sat in comfortable, peaceful silence. There was no toxic family. There was no social media drama. There were no manipulative group chats or screaming matches. There was only the gentle rustle of leaves, the distant sound of city traffic, and absolute total freedom. I had lost a kidney, but I had gained my life. I drew a fierce, impenetrable boundary and protected the only family member who truly mattered. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Have you ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your own peace and sanity? Let me know how you found the courage to set your boundaries in the comments below. If my journey resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with anyone who needs a reminder that standing up for yourself is the most powerful thing you can do. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next story. The story of Lauren, who sacrificed her own kidney only to have her mother and sister exploit her physical trauma for financial and social gain, illuminates a devastating but necessary truth. Sharing DNA does not guarantee unconditional love, loyalty, or basic human decency. For generations, society has conditioned us to believe the prevailing narrative that family is everything. We are taught to endlessly forgive the transgressions of our parents or siblings, no matter how deeply they cut. However, as this story powerfully demonstrates, unconditional forgiveness in the face of continuous manipulation often becomes a toxic trap, forcing the most empathetic family members to be complicit in their own exploitation. Lauren's initial instinct at that Thanksgiving table was to stay silent to keep the peace, a trauma response intimately familiar to anyone raised in a narcissistic household. Her mother and sister weaponized her love for her father, turning her life-saving sacrifice into a fraudulent, self-serving spectacle. The profound lesson here is the realization that participating in a toxic family's illusions will only destroy your own reality. Lauren's ultimate turning point wasn't just about the stolen charity money. It was the visceral, heartbreaking understanding that her mother's approval was not a prize to be won, but a rigged game designed to keep her small and subservient. Healing begins the exact moment we stop waiting for toxic people to suddenly develop a conscience. True empowerment comes from recognizing that you have the right to walk away from the table when respect is no longer being served. We must learn to grieve the family we desperately deserved, accept the harsh reality of the family we actually have, and draw impenetrable boundaries to safeguard our well-being. If you are currently sacrificing your mental or physical health for people who only value what they can extract from you, take a step back today and choose to fiercely protect your own peace instead.